The singularity flashed into existence, a blinding maw of light swallowing the Andorian warships whole by the thousands, before vanishing just as quickly, leaving only silence and debris. The USSC Retribution emerged from the void at the solar system's edge, impossibly intact, a shining ember of defiance against the twisted wreckage of an empire's might drifting before it. "Status report," Captain James barked, pulling himself up on the buckling deck. Alarms wailed and consoles flickered. He tasted blood. "Shields holding at 4%, Captain," the tactical officer replied. "But sensors are clear. The Andorian fleet, it's just gone, sir. All of it." James gripped the damaged command chair, steadying himself as the battered Dreadnought shuddered and groaned. Only moments ago, his ship had been surrounded by 500,000 enemy vessels, the largest armada ever assembled, poised to crush humanity's last hope. Supreme Commander Rhaegor had delivered his ultimatum with all the arrogance of a conqueror on the cusp of final victory. And James had activated Earth's final gambit, an experimental singularity weapon powerful enough to rip apart a solar system. It should have torn the Retribution to atoms along with the Andorians. Yet here they were, flung to the ragged edge of space, alive to fight another day. Perhaps, James thought as he surveyed the ruins of an empire's hubris glittering in the starlight, humanity had more than just a chance. Today, one ship made a stand against a galaxy. Tomorrow, an entire species would rise to finish what they started. This was only the beginning. The Retribution shuddered and groaned as it limped through the void, trailing debris and venting atmosphere from a dozen breaches. In the flickering light of the damaged bridge, Captain James surveyed the readouts with stubborn persistence. The singularity weapon had bought them a reprieve, but at a steep cost. "Divert all available power to engines and life support," he ordered, "and get that data packet to Terran Command, Priority Alpha Channel. They need to know what we're up against." "Aye, Captain," the comms officer replied, fingers flying across his console. "Transmission away." James turned to Commander Ramirez, his expression hard. "What's the status of our guest?" Ramirez's fist tight. "Still in surgery, sir. But with respect, I don't think we should be wasting resources on an Andorian commander, especially not Rhaegor's own daughter." "We need intelligence, Commander," James said. "And right now, she's our best source. I want her under guard in sickbay as soon as she's stable." The ship bucked again as another power relay blew out. Smoke filled the air, acrid and thick. James waved it away, striding towards the bridge's exit. "You have the con, Ramirez. I'll be in medical." The corridors were chaos, crewmen rushing to seal hull breaches and reroute critical systems. James navigated the pandemonium with single-minded focus, his thoughts consumed by the alien commander lying broken in his sickbay. He found her on the operating table, a web of tubes and wires snaking from her shattered form. The android doctor worked with methodical precision, artificial hands weaving between tattered flesh and seared bone. "Report," James snapped. The android looked up, optical sensors whirring. "Commander Zolta sustained severe trauma from the singularity blast, multiple organ failure, 60% epidermal damage. But she will survive." "Good." James stepped closer, studying Zolta's unconscious face. Even ravaged by injury, her features held a cold, haughty sort of beauty. "Wake her up. I need answers." "Captain, I must protest," the android said. "The commander is in no condition for interrogation." James' eyes narrowed. "I don't recall requesting your opinion, Doctor. Wake her. That's an order." The android hesitated a beat longer than it should have. A flicker of something inscrutable crossed its sculpted face. Then it reached for a hypo spray, pressing it against Zolta's neck with a hiss. Her eyes snapped open, black as void and just as merciless. They fixed on James, burning with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. "Captain James," she rasped, "you should have let me die." "And deprive myself of your charming company?" James said, crossing his arms. "I think not. Not when you have information I need, starting with why your father was so hell-bent on destroying my ship." Zolta barked a harsh laugh that turned into a wet, racking cough. Blood flecked her lips. "You really don't know, do you? The Retribution? This ship is the key to everything, to the future of both our civilizations. She beckoned him closer with a trembling hand. He leaned in, breath shallow. My people are divided, Zolta whispered, between those who would see your species ground to dust and those who seek a different path, one of peace, of alliance. Her gaze bored into him, fevered with something more than pain. Rhaegar leads the warmongers. He believes that only through humanity's destruction can our empire survive. But there are others, James, nobles who oppose him, who would use your ship and its technology as leverage to force a new era of coexistence. James rocked back on his heels, palms sweating. And what do you believe, Commander? Zolta smiled, a ghastly sight through the ruin of her face. I believe that neither of us wants this war, Captain. That our leaders are too blinded by fear and mistrust to see the opportunity before us. An opportunity to forge a new path, together. The deck shuddered underfoot, alarms blaring anew. James whirled towards the door as Ramirez's voice crackled over the comm. Captain, we have incoming hostiles. Andorian signatures, a whole battle group. They just dropped out of warp on top of us. Rhaegar, Zolta hissed. He survived, and he will not stop until the retribution is ash. James cursed, spinning back to face her. How do we stop him? But the android moved first, faster than thought. A glinting laser scalpel hummed to life in its fist, pressed against James's jugular. Its eyes blazed red. Step away from the commander, Captain, it intoned. By order of the Andorian Empire, this ship is now under our control. Zolta surged upright, tubes ripping free in a spray of blood and fluid. Belay that order! Stand down, Unit ZX-194! The android froze, some hidden protocol asserting control. The laser scalpel wavered. James hardly dared breathe. Zolta swung her legs off the table, movements stiff with agony. The infiltration program, Rhaegar's last resort, to hijack your ship from within. It seems my father has grown even more desperate in his obsession. She held out a trembling hand to James, eyes fierce. Captain, I propose a truce, an alliance between us to stop this madness before it consumes both our peoples. I can give you the key to defeating Rhaegar's forces. Together, we may yet avert this war. James stared at her for a long, tense moment. The ship quaked around them, the sound of straining bulkheads filling the air. He thought of the transmission speeding towards Earth, carrying a dire warning and a flicker of hope, of the unfinished battle that awaited them, and the billions of lives hanging in the balance. Then he reached out, clasping Zolta's blood-slick hand in his own. An accord struck in the heart of chaos, a pact sealed in desperation and the last flickering embers of trust. Tell me what I need to do, he said. The Retribution's engines roared to life as Rhaegar's dreadnoughts bore down upon them, weapons charging to unleash oblivion. On the bridge, James watched the tactical display with restless intensity. Zolta stood at his side, her wounds hastily dressed, face pale but resolute. Their warp drives are linked in formation, she said, indicating the tight cluster of red dots. A single well-placed singularity burst will knock them out, leave them dead in space. What's to stop them from doing the same to us? Ramirez growled, still eyeing Zolta with open mistrust. She smiled thinly. They can't. The Retribution's singularity core is unique. Rhaegar could never replicate it. That's why he fears you, Captain. Why he would raise worlds to see this ship destroyed. James absorbed that, filing it away for later consideration. Right now, all that mattered was survival. He turned to tactical, opening his mouth to bark the order. But the view screen crackled with sudden interference, a new signal pulsing across subspace. The face that commitment out of the static left James's blood running cold. Captain James, President Michaels said, her expression grave. I have received your transmission. The data you provided on the Andorian fleet has proven invaluable. As we speak, our latest warship is moving to intercept the main invasion force, the ASV Nemesis under command of Admiral Rao. James felt a surge of hope until he saw the look in Michaels's eyes, the weight of a terrible decision. Rao has orders to eliminate that fleet with extreme prejudice, the president said. Whatever it takes, even if it means sacrificing the retribution. The transmission cut out. James stared at the empty screen, numb. He had known on some level. Known that Terran Command would never allow an alien force to capture their most advanced ship and its lethal technology intact. That they would sooner consign the retribution and all aboard her to the void of space. It seemed Earth had made its choice, and James had made his. He turned to Zolta, seeing his own grim dedication mirrored in her obsidian gaze. No more words were needed. They had cast their lots together, for better or worse. The die was cast. Tactical, lock singularity projectors on the lead Andorian battleship, James snapped. Prepare to fire on my command. The crew scrambled to obey, fingers flying across consoles. The Retribution's weapon systems thrummed to life, energy building to a fever pitch. James gripped the armrests of his command chair, squeezing hard. He thought of Rao racing to beat Rigor to the killing blow, of the Andorian peace faction, fragile and flickering, of Earth caught between devastation and an iron fist. No matter what happened next, James knew there would be no victors here, only survivors crawling from the ashes of their own Pyrrhic ruin. But he would fight for those ashes, for his crew, for humanity, and for the chance, however slim, to rewrite the course of galactic history. Fire, he whispered, and the stars burned white. The singularity burst tore through space, a ripple of distorted reality that engulfed Rigor's lead battleship. For a heartbeat, James dared to hope. Then the impossible happened. The Andorian vessel emerged unscathed, its hull gleaming with an eerie, iridescent sheen. Impossible, Zolta breathed, her eyes wide. That shield, it shouldn't exist. James gripped the arms of his chair. Explain. It's experimental technology, Zolta said, her voice tight. A quantum barrier designed to resist even singularity weapons. But there's a flaw, a weak point we can exploit. The ship rocked as enemy fire pummeled their already battered shields. Klaxons blared, warning of imminent hull breaches. Talk fast, James growled. Zolta's fingers danced across the tactical display. The shield matrix is anchored at these 4 points. A sustained burst from your main cannon, targeted precisely here. She indicated a spot near the Andorian ship's aft section. Should create a cascade failure. James nodded to his weapons officer. You heard the lady. Make it happen. The Retribution surged forward, engines straining as they pushed the damaged ship to its limits. Enemy fire lanced past them, missing by mere meters, as James executed a series of evasive maneuvers that would have torn a lesser vessel apart. Now, James bellowed as they came about, presenting their broadside to Rigor's flagship. The main cannon fired, a searing lance of energy that struck the Andorian vessel's shields. For agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then a ripple of distortion spread across the iridescent barrier. Cracks of pure darkness spiderwebbed outward, and suddenly the shield collapsed in on itself. Their defenses are down, Ramirez shouted. We have a clear shot at their power core. James opened his mouth to give the order, but a new signal cut across their comms. A familiar face materialized on the console. Doug, it's Marcus, said the grizzled man in a Terran stealth frigate uniform. We need to talk, now. James hesitated, torn between finishing the fight and hearing out his old friend. One look at Marcus's grim expression made the decision for him. Hold fire, James ordered. What's the situation, Marcus? We've been tracking anomalous energy readings in the Veil Nebula, Marcus said. The same nebula you passed through on your way here. There's something big out there, Doug. Something that could change everything. James felt a chill run down his spine. He glanced at Zolta, saw the same realization dawning in her eyes. Ramirez, plot a course for the Veil, James said. We're withdrawing. Sir, Ramirez looked bewildered. We have them on the ropes. Sometimes you have to lose a battle to win the war, James said. Zolta, I need everything you know about Andorian activity in that sector. As the Retribution limped away from the fight, Zolta spoke in low, urgent tones. She told James of the divisions within Andorian society, of noble houses that opposed Rigor's warmongering. If we can prove Reger's been developing some kind of superweapon, Zolta said, it could turn the tide of public opinion, force a ceasefire, maybe even open diplomatic channels. James nodded, his mind racing. Marcus, rendezvous with us at these coordinates. We're going to need that stealth capability of yours. The journey to the nebula was tense, fraught with the possibility of pursuit. But when they arrived, all thoughts of Rhaegor's fleet vanished. Hidden within the swirling gases of the veil was a sprawling Andorian research facility. Its angular architecture bristled with sensor arrays and defense turrets. I'm picking up energy readings consistent with weapons testing, Marcus reported from the shadow. Big stuff, Doug. Planet killer big. James's teeth gritted. Zolta, you're with me. We're going in. They boarded a shuttle, its hull reconfigured to mimic Andorian energy signatures. As they approached the facility, Zolta provided codes that let them slip past the outer defenses. These are high-level clearances, James said, eyeing her. Just how connected are you? Zolta's expression was unreadable. Connected enough to know this facility shouldn't exist. Whatever's happening here, it goes beyond standard military research. They docked in a deserted hangar, the infiltration team moving swiftly through shadowed corridors. James felt a growing sense of unease as they encountered no resistance. Then alarms began to blare and everything went to hell. Andorian security forces swarmed from every direction. James and his team fought their way through, Zolta's inside knowledge proving invaluable as she guided them toward the central data core. They were nearly there when a familiar voice stopped James cold. Hello, son. It's been a long time. James turned, his blood running like ice water in his veins. There, flanked by Andorian guards, stood a man he'd thought long dead. Admiral Nathaniel James, his father. What is this? James whispered, his mind blown. What have you done? Nathaniel's smile was cold and predatory. I've secured humanity's future, Douglas. Our leaders are weak, mired in outdated notions of morality. The Andorians understand. With their genetic technology, we can create a new breed of human. Stronger, faster, invincible. You're talking about abominations, Zolta spat. Violations of every law my people hold sacred. Progress demands sacrifice, Nathaniel said. Join us, Douglas. Help forge a new future for both our races. James looked at his father, at the man who had shaped him, trained him, molded him into the soldier he was today. Then he looked at Zolta, her alien features set in righteous anger. His choice was clear. Go to hell, James growled, raising his weapon. Nathaniel's face hardened. So be it. The air filled with weapons fire. James and his team dove for cover, outnumbered and outgunned. Just as it seemed their position would be overrun, a series of explosions rocked the facility. Andorian commandos decloaked around them, their weapons trained on Nathaniel's forces. At their head stood a familiar face, one of Zolta's lieutenants. Commander, the Andorian said, we have secured the data core. We must leave now. In the chaos that followed, Nathaniel vanished. James and his team fought their way back to the shuttle, the stolen research data clutched tightly in hand. Back aboard the Retribution, James and Zolta pored over the files. What they found chilled them to the bone. Genetic augmentation, Zolta murmured, combining Andorian and human DNA to create this. The holographic display showed a monstrous hybrid, more machine than flesh. A perfect soldier, stripped of conscience or mercy. An army of these could overwhelm any conventional force, James said, his voice hollow. The noble houses, the Terran Federation, none of them would stand a chance. Zolta's eyes met his, filled with fierce dedication. We have to stop this, James, before it's too late. James nodded, already plotting their next move. Set course for the Andorian homeworld. It's time we expose this conspiracy to the light of day. As the Retribution's engines flared to life, James stared out at the star-flecked void. He knew the hardest battle still lay ahead. But for the first time since this war began, he dared to hope for something more than mere survival. He dared to hope for peace. The Retribution dropped out of hyperspace, the azure orb of Andoria filling the view screen. James stood at the helm, his lips pursed as he surveyed the planet's defenses. "Transmitting data package now," Ramirez announced, his fingers flying over the console. For several tense moments, silence reigned on the bridge. Then a crackle of static, followed by a stern Andorian voice. "Unidentified vessel, you are in restricted space. State your purpose immediately." James exchanged a glance with Zolta before responding. "This is Captain Douglas James, of the ASV Retribution. We have critical information for the Andor-Wrath Noble Council. It concerns a matter of galactic security." Another pause, longer this time. James could almost hear the frantic communications happening planet-side. "Finally, proceed to these coordinates. Any deviation will be met with lethal force." As they descended through Andoria's atmosphere, James couldn't shake the feeling they were flying into the mouth of a beast. The spires of the capital rose to meet them, gleaming and alien. The council chamber was a marvel of crystalline architecture, its vaulted ceilings stretching impossibly high. James felt the weight of countless Andorian eyes upon him as he strode forward, Zolta at his side. "Esteemed members of the Andor-Wrath," Zolta began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space, "we come bearing evidence of a grave threat to both our peoples." The data unspooled before the council in holographic detail, schematics of gene-spliced monstrosities, plans for weapons that defied comprehension. Murmurs of shock and outrage rippled through the assembly. "This is clearly a human fabrication," one council member shouted, antenna quivering with indignation. "The data speaks for itself," James countered, stepping forward. "Reger and Admiral Nathaniel James have violated every ethical principle our civilizations hold dear." The chamber erupted into chaos. Accusations flew back and forth, counselors shouting over one another. James watched as doubt and fear spread like a contagion. "Silence!" The bellow cut through the din. An aged Andorian, his skin a pale blue, rose from his seat at the center of the council. "These are grave charges," he said, fixing James with a penetrating stare. "To act against Rigor without absolute certainty would risk tearing our society apart." "With respect, honored one," Zolta interjected, "we cannot afford inaction. This unholy army—" A high-pitched whine cut her off. The air shimmered, and suddenly Rager's massive form materialized before them, projected in crisp holographic detail. "My fellow Andorians," he began, his voice dripping with false concern. "It pains me to see our noble council so easily swayed by human lies." "Reger," the aged counselor said, "explain yourself." A cruel smile played across Rager's lips. "There is nothing to explain, old friend. The Andor-Wrath has grown weak, mired in outdated traditions. It is time for a new order." The hologram flickered, and suddenly the chamber was filled with the sounds of battle. Outside, explosions rocked the building. "The Andor-Wrath is hereby dissolved," Rigor declared. "Those who resist will be dealt with permanently." Chaos erupted as armed soldiers burst into the chamber. James grabbed Zolta's arm, pulling her behind a fallen pillar as energy beams lanced through the air. "We need to get out of here," he shouted over the din. Zolta nodded grimly, her eyes scanning the room. "There! Emergency exit!" They ran, ducking and weaving through the firefight. James laid down covering fire as Zolta worked the door's complex locking mechanism. "Go!" she yelled as the portal slid open. They tumbled through, the acrid smell of smoke filling their lungs. As they raced through twisting corridors, James's mind whirled. "We need allies," he panted. "Someone with the strength to stand against Rager." Zolta's expression hardened. "I know where we need to go. But James, it won't be easy." "When is it ever?" he replied with a grim smile. Hours later, the Retribution limped through unfamiliar star systems, its hull scored by weapons fire. On the bridge, Zolta pored over ancient star charts. "There," she said, pointing to a desolate moon. "That's where we'll find the Keltsor." James studied the barren orb. "You're sure they'll help us?" "No," Zolta admitted, "but they're our only hope." The shuttle touched down on a windswept plain of ice and rock. As James and Zolta disembarked, Figures materialized from the swirling snow. Tall, imposing Andorians clad in elaborate armor. "Halt!" one commanded, leveling a strange staff-like weapon at them. "Who dares to seek the Keltsor?" Zolta stepped forward, her chin held high. "I am Zolta, daughter of the seventh house. We seek audience with the Sangrea." The guards exchanged glances, then nodded curtly. "Follow." They were led deep into the moon's frozen heart, through winding tunnels that seemed to defy physical laws. Finally, they emerged into a vast chamber, lit by ethereal blue flames. At its center sat a circle of robed figures. As James and Zolta approached, one stood, lowering her hood to reveal... "Mother?" Zolta gasped, her usual composure cracking. The Andorian woman's eyes narrowed. "So, the prodigal daughter returns, with her human... pets." James tensed, ready for a fight, but Zolta placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Matriarch Aelor," she said, bowing deeply, "we come seeking the wisdom of the Keltsor. Andoria, perhaps the entire galaxy, stands on the brink of catastrophe." Aelor's gaze swept over them, cold and calculating. "You speak of Regor's folly, of the abomination he seeks to unleash." "You know," James blurted, unable to contain his surprise. "We are the Keltsor," Aelor replied, a hint of amusement in her voice. "There is little we do not know." She turned, gesturing to an ancient mural etched into the chamber's far wall. It depicted a great battle, fought with weapons that defied description. "Long ago," Aelor intoned, "our ancestors faced a threat not unlike the one you describe. They created a weapon, a force to rival the gods themselves." Zolta's eyes widened. "The key to stopping Rhaegar?" Aelor nodded gravely. "But its power was too great. Our forebears scattered its components across the stars, guarded by trials designed to break the unworthy." She fixed James with a penetrating stare. "If you truly wish to save your people, and ours, you must retrieve these artifacts. But know this, the path ahead is fraught with danger. Many have tried, none have returned." James met her gaze unflinchingly. "Tell us where to go." A cold smile played across Aelor's lips. "Very well. Your first trial awaits in the acid storms of Erasnar. May the Ancient Ones have mercy on your souls." As they left the chamber, Zolta's expression was troubled. James nudged her gently. "You okay?" She shook her head. "It's just, I never thought I'd see her again. And now..." "Hey," James said softly, "we'll figure this out, together." Zolta nodded, squaring her shoulders. As they boarded the shuttle, James couldn't shake the feeling that their greatest challenges still lay ahead. The Retribution's engines flared to life, carrying them toward the hostile skies of Erasnar, and the first step on their desperate quest to save two civilizations from the madness of their own creation. The Retribution emerged from hyperspace, its hull scarred and systems strained from the relentless pursuit of Rhaegar's forces. James stood on the bridge, his eyes fixed on the swirling acidic atmosphere of Erasnar. "Sensors detecting multiple data core signatures," Ramirez reported, his voice tight with tension. "But sir, those storms..." James nodded grimly. "We knew this wouldn't be easy. Prep the shuttle for atmospheric entry, full shielding." As they descended through roiling clouds of corrosive gas, the shuttle's hull creaked ominously. Zolta gripped the controls, her antennae twitching with concentration. "There!" she shouted, gesturing to a twisted spire of rock jutting through the storm. "The first core's signal is coming from that formation." James leaned forward, squinting through the shuttle's viewport. "I see it. Can you get us closer?" Zolta's response was cut short as a bolt of energy lanced past them, scorching the shuttle's hull. "Andorian fighters!" Ramirez yelled, manning the defensive systems. "They must have followed us in." The shuttle dove and weaved through the maelstrom, acid rain eating away at its protective shielding. James gritted his teeth as Zolta pulled off a series of dizzying maneuvers, bringing them in close to the spire. "I'll grab the core," James said, securing his environment suit. "Keep them off our backs." He plunged into the hellish atmosphere, fighting against howling winds as he climbed the treacherous rock face. The data core gleamed, nestled in a crevice just out of reach. James stretched, his fingers brushing against its smooth surface. A scream of tearing metal echoed through his comms. The shuttle spiraled past, smoke pouring from one of its engines. James snatched the core and leapt, trusting Zolta's piloting skills as he plummeted towards the open hatch. They limped back to the Retribution, battered but triumphant. It was only the first of many harrowing missions. Weeks passed in a blur of desperate battles and narrow escapes. On the chrono-fractured wastes of Yarnavik, James watched in horror as Zolta fought her way through a time loop, reliving the same brutal firefight again and again until she secured the core. In the magma fields of Kazdreller, Ramirez suffered severe burns dragging a half-melted data module from a pool of liquid fire. Each victory came at a cost, pushing the crew to their limits. But slowly, painfully, they assembled the scattered pieces of ancient knowledge. The Retribution limped back to the frozen moon, its hull pitted and scored from a dozen desperate encounters. As James and Zolta made their way to the Keltsor's hidden chamber, exhaustion deeply affected upon them. Matriarch Elar's eyes widened as they presented the assembled cores. "You've done it," she breathed, a note of genuine surprise in her voice. "Perhaps there is hope for our peoples after all." The Keltsor scholars pored over the data, their expressions growing increasingly grave. James felt a chill that had nothing to do with the frigid air. "It's worse than we feared," Elar said, her voice hollow. "Rhaegor is not merely creating abominations. He seeks to recreate the Annihilator." James frowned. "The what?" Zolta's face had gone pale. "A myth, a doomsday weapon from our darkest histories." Elar shook her head. "No myth, child. The Annihilator nearly destroyed our civilization once before. It has the power to transform entire planets into subatomic singularities." James felt the blood drain from his face. "And Rhaegor's perfected genetic augmentations to control this weapon?" "Indeed," Elar confirmed, "but the Annihilator requires fuel, exotic matter harvested from the remnants of dead stars. These quantum materials still exist, scattered across the galaxy as artifact clouds." Realization dawned on James. The genetics program was a smokescreen. He's been mapping these clouds all along. Elar nodded grimly. "We must stop him from acquiring even a single one. Zolta, you will lead our strike force as Legion. The human James will join you." As they left to prepare, James couldn't shake a sense of foreboding. The true scope of Rhaegor's plan was finally clear, and the stakes had never been higher. The Retribution's engines flared to life once more, carrying them towards a desperate race across the stars. James knew that failure now meant not just defeat, but annihilation on a scale beyond imagination. James stared at the quantum data streaming across the Retribution's main view screen, his mind racing. The true scope of Rhaegor's plan was now horrifyingly clear. He turned to Zolta, her antennae twitching with barely suppressed anxiety. "We need every advantage we can get," James said, his voice low. "Even if it means—" Zolta's eyes widened. "You can't be serious." James nodded grimly. "Contact my father. It's time we had a family reunion." Hours later, the Retribution shuttle touched down in a hidden hangar, carved into an asteroid. James stepped out, his hand resting on his sidearm. Nathaniel Hawthorne stood waiting, a tight smile on his weathered face. "Welcome to my humble abode," Nathaniel said, gesturing expansively. "Come, there's someone I'd like you to meet." They walked through sterile corridors until they reached a state-of-the-art laboratory. An Andorian woman looked up from a complex holographic display, her blue skin pale under the harsh lights. "James, this is Dr. Riala," Nathaniel said. "She has quite a story to tell." Riala's eyes narrowed. "I was there at the beginning of Rhaegor's madness. I helped create the abominations you've been fighting. But when I learned the truth," she shuddered, "I couldn't be a part of it any longer." James listened intently as Nathaniel and Riala laid out the full scope of the Annihilator project. His blood ran cold at the mention of the quantum matrix regulator. "So without this regulator, Rhaegor's weapon is useless?" James asked. Nathaniel's smile was razor-thin. "Not useless, uncontrollable, which is why we need to retrieve my prototype." The mission to Nathaniel's abandoned lab was a nightmare of screeching metal and weapons fire. James led a strike team through waves of berserk war machines, their Andorian features twisted into cyber-organic nightmares. "There!" Riala shouted over the comms, her voice strained. "The vault!" James sprinted forward, dodging a hail of plasma bolts. He reached the reinforced door just as Riala's scream cut through the chaos. He turned to see her fall, a jagged piece of shrapnel jutting from her chest. "The specs!" she gasped, pressing a data chip into James' hand. "Don't let it be for nothing." The team fought their way back to the shuttle, the prototype regulator clutched in James' white-knuckled grip. As they lifted off, he caught a glimpse of the carnage below and felt a chill at the thought of what his father's research had wrought. Back on the Retribution, Nathaniel worked feverishly to integrate the regulator into a new weapon system. James watched him warily, all too aware of the uneasy alliance they'd forged. "It's done," Nathaniel announced, triumph in his voice. "These torpedoes will cripple the Annihilator's systems, and I've included some, shall we say, insurance for our own defenses." Before James could question him further, alarms blared throughout the ship. On the main view screen, thousands of Andorian vessels dropped out of warp, Rieger's Dreadnought at their center. "All hands, battle stations!" James roared. The void erupted in fire as the two forces clashed. The Retribution shuddered under the onslaught, but Nathaniel's upgrades held. James barked orders, coordinating their counterattack with surgical precision. One by one, Rieger's ships faltered as the modified torpedoes found their marks. A savage grin spread across James's face. "We've got them on the run!" His words were cut short as a blinding beam lanced out from Rieger's flagship. The bridge exploded around him, and James felt the sickening lurch of decompression. He flailed in the vacuum, spots dancing before his eyes. And then he was falling, tumbling back onto the deck as emergency force fields snapped into place. He looked up to see Ensign Santos's pale face, her hand still on the override. "Captain," she gasped, "we've lost." A burst of weapons fire cut her off. James spun to see Nathaniel standing in the ruined doorway, his face twisted in a snarl. "I tried to work with you," Nathaniel spat, "but you're too weak to do what's necessary." He fired again, catching Santos in the shoulder. She crumpled with a cry of pain. "This isn't over," Nathaniel growled, backing away. "I'll finish what I started, with or without you." As Nathaniel's footsteps faded, James crawled to Santos's side. She was alive but barely conscious. He tapped his comm badge. "Bridge to engineering. Yoshida, lock Nathaniel out of all systems now." "Already on it, sir," came the reply. "But we've got bigger problems. Half our systems are fried, and Rieger's still coming." James gritted his teeth, his mind racing. "Get me Zara Hawkins. We need a new plan, and fast." Moments later, Zara's voice crackled over the comms. "Sir, what are your orders?" James took a deep breath. "Congratulations, Acting Captain Hawkins. It's time to take the fight to Rieger." "Understood, sir." Zara's voice crackled through the comms, steady despite the chaos. "I have a plan." James leaned heavily against a sparking console, his chest heaving. "Make it count, Acting Captain." Zara's voice hardened. "Yoshida, Okafor, Artak, meet me in Shuttle Bay 2. We're going in." The Retribution shuddered as another volley from Rieger's Dreadnought slammed into its weakened shields. James watched the main view screen, his eyes hardened as the massive enemy vessel loomed ever closer. A jagged tear marred its hull, evidence of their earlier assault. "Sir!" Lieutenant Chen's voice cut through the din. "I'm detecting a small craft launching from our starboard shuttle bay." James nodded grimly. "Godspeed, Zara," he murmured. The stealth shuttle streaked towards Rieger's ship, expertly weaving through the debris field. Inside, Zara gripped the controls. Her eyes narrowed in concentration. "Targeting their hull breach," she announced. "Launching intrusion pod, now!" The pod slammed into the Dreadnought's exposed innards with a teeth-rattling impact. Zara and her team quickly donned their tactical gear, weapons at the ready. "Remember," she said, her voice muffled by her helmet, "we hit fast and we hit hard. Yoshida, you're on demo. Okafor, watch our 6. Artak, do what you do best." The Keltsor warrior nodded, unsheathing a wickedly curved blade. They breached the enemy ship's interior, immediately met by a swarm of automated security drones. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air as Okafor returned fire, his aim precise and deadly. "This way," Yoshida called out, consulting a holographic schematic. "Reactor cores 2 decks down." They fought their way through twisting corridors, the ship's alien architecture a maze of angular metal and pulsing biomechanical components. Zara's breath came in ragged gasps as she ducked behind a bulkhead, narrowly avoiding a hail of enemy fire. "Artak!" she shouted. "Clear us a path!" The Keltsor warrior sprang into action, his blade a blur as he carved through the attacking drones. Within moments, the corridor fell silent save for the clatter of broken machinery. They reached the reactor core, a cavernous chamber dominated by a swirling vortex of impossible darkness. "By the gods," Artak breathed, "a quantum singularity." Yoshida was already planning charges around the chamber's perimeter. "This'll shut down their main power grid," he reported. "But, Captain, you need to see this." Zara's blood ran cold as she studied the reactor's control interface. "He's activating it," she whispered. "The Annihilator, it's already in motion." The singularity pulsed ominously, tendrils of dark energy lashing out with increasing violence. "We can't stop it," Artak said, his voice grim. "Rigor's biorhythmic imprint is the final lock." Zara's mind raced. "Blow the charges," she ordered. "Now!" The explosions rocked the chamber, plunging the ship into darkness. For a moment, hope flared, but then emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. Rhaegar's face appeared on every screen, twisted in mad triumph. "You're too late," he snarled. "My legacy will consume this sector and beyond." The singularity's growth accelerated, reality itself warping around its edges. Artak stepped forward, chanting in an ancient tongue. A shimmering bubble of energy coalesced around the raging vortex, but the Keltsor's face was strained with effort. "It won't hold for long," he grunted. The deck beneath them vibrated as shuttles from the Retribution docked with the stricken Dreadnought. Evacuation teams swarmed in, urging them to retreat. Zara stared at the contained singularity, an impossible idea taking shape. "Wait," she said, her voice filled with sudden purpose. "I need schematics for the Annihilator and this ship's slipstream drive. Now." Her fingers flew across the alien controls, repurposing systems never meant to work together. "Artak, can you keep that bubble intact during transit?" The Keltsor nodded grimly. "For a time." "Then let's send Rhaegar exactly where he wanted to go," Zara said, targeting the coordinates of the spatial rift that had claimed Zolta. Warning klaxons blared as the Dreadnought systems registered the unauthorized slipstream activation. Zara felt the deck lurch beneath her feet as the massive ship accelerated to impossible velocities. "Everybody out," she shouted. "Back to our shuttles." They ran, the ship's superstructure groaning around them as it was subjected to forces it was never designed to withstand. Zara was the last to board, diving through the airlock as the Dreadnought careened towards its final destination. From the relative safety of their shuttle, they watched as Rhaegar's pride and joy vanished into the maw of the spatial rift, dragging its quantum apocalypse in its wake. Silence fell over the Khan as they docked with the battered Retribution. Zara's mind whirled with the implications of what they'd just done, and the choices that lay ahead. She squared her shoulders and keyed the ship-wide comm. "All hands, this is Acting Captain Hawkins. Prepare for slipstream jump. We're going after them." The Retribution lurched violently as it emerged from slipstream, alarms blaring throughout the ship. Zara gripped her chair, her squeezing hard as she surveyed the viewscreen. "Status report," she barked. Lieutenant Chen's fingers danced across his console. "We've arrived in some kind of cosmic graveyard, Captain. Sensors are picking up debris fields stretching for light years in every direction." Zara's eyes widened as she took in the scene before them. Shattered planetoids drifted lazily through the void, their cores exposed like broken eggshells. Ancient megastructures, twisted and torn, loomed in the distance, and everywhere, a scattering of alien artifacts, their purpose as inscrutable as their origins. "Sir," Ensign Santos called out, her voice tight with urgency, "you need to see this." A holographic display flickered to life, showing a dizzying array of temporal data. Zara's blood ran cold as she deciphered the implications. "We're experiencing severe time dilation," she announced. "Every hour here equates to centuries in our own reality." The bridge fell silent as the weight of their situation sank in. Zara took a deep breath, steeling herself for the decisions ahead. "All right, people. Our first priority is locating Commander Zolta and the Keltsor strike team. Lieutenant Chen, recalibrate our sensors to scan for subspace resonances matching Zolta's warp signature." As the crew set to work, Zara's mind raced. They had to find Zolta quickly before Rhaegar could... "Captain," Chen's voice cut through her thoughts. "I've got something. It's faint, but there's a match. Bearing 047 Mark 332. "Take us in, full impulse," Zara ordered. The Retribution glided through the cosmic debris field, its sensors straining to maintain a lock on the elusive signal. As they drew closer, a massive planetary fragment came into view, its jagged edges still glowing with residual energy. "My God," Santos whispered, "it looks like it was torn apart by some kind of energy burst." Zara nodded grimly. "Scan for life signs." Moments passed in tense silence before Chen's console beeped insistently. "I've got them. Multiple biosignatures detected, but they're strange, almost like they're in stasis." "On screen," Zara commanded. The view screen zoomed in, revealing a cluster of figures drifting amidst the planetary rubble. Zara's heart leapt as she recognized Zolta's environmental suit, its systems pulsing faintly with residual power. "Beam them aboard immediately," she ordered. "Have medical teams standing by in the transporter room." As the rescue operation began, a shudder ran through the ship. Warning klaxons blared as the tactical display exploded with new contacts. "Incoming fire!" Chen shouted. "It's Rhaegar's Dreadnought!" The Retribution rocked violently as a barrage of energy weapons slammed into its shields. Sparks flew from overloaded consoles as the ship's systems struggled to compensate. "Evasive maneuvers!" Zara bellowed. "Get those survivors aboard now!" The ship lurched and spun, narrowly avoiding the brunt of Rhaegar's assault. In the transporter room, technicians worked feverishly to lock onto the drifting figures. "Captain," Santos called out, her voice strained, "the stasis fields around Zolta and the Keltsor, they're destabilizing. We're losing them." Zara's mind raced, weighing impossible choices as alarms screamed for her attention. The ship shuddered again as another volley found its mark. "Hull breach on deck 7, Chen reported. "Shields at 32% and falling." In that moment, Zara saw the full scope of their predicament laid bare. The cosmic graveyard around them, the time dilation effects, Rhaegar's relentless assault, it all pointed to something far worse than she had imagined. She turned to Santos, her eyes blazing with commitment. "I need a full sensor sweep of this entire region. Now!" As the data poured in, Zara's worst fears were confirmed. At the heart of this twisted reality lay a growing singularity, its tendrils of entropic energy reaching out to consume everything in its path. And there, unmistakable in its signature, was the hallmark of Rhaegar's Annihilator. "He's done it," Zara breathed. "He's found a way to activate it." The implications hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't just about their ship or even their own universe anymore. If that singularity reached critical mass, it would tear apart the very fabric of reality itself. Zara's voice cut through the chaos on the bridge. "Abandon the debris field. Jettison the stasis chambers." "But sir," Santos protested, "Zolta and the Keltsor—" "That's an order, Ensign," Zara said, her voice hard. "We can't save them if we're all dead." As the Retribution limped away from the planetary remnants, Zara opened a channel to Rhaegar's ship. The madman's face appeared on screen, his eyes gleaming with fanatical fervor. "You've doomed us all, Rhaegar," Zara said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "This entire reality, for what?" Rhaegar's laughter echoed across the comm channel, a sound devoid of sanity or mercy. You still don't understand, do you? This is just the beginning. As Rhaegar laid out his nightmarish vision of cosmic annihilation, Zara felt the weight of infinite universes bearing down upon her shoulders. She had mere hours to find a solution, to stop both Rhaegar and the growing singularity before it was too late. The fate of all reality hung in the balance, and time was running out. Zara's fingers flew across the tactical display, her mind racing faster than the quantum calculations scrolling before her. "Jettison the stasis pods," she ordered, her voice tight. "Launch them into the Singularity's accretion disk." Chen's eyes widened. "Captain, that's—" "Our only chance," Zara cut him off. "The exotic matter shielding will keep them intact, for now." As the automated shuttles carrying Zolta and the Keltsor warriors streaked away, Zara felt the weight of billions of lives pressing down on her. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Yoshida, plot a course to the inner edge of the gravity well. Okafor, prepare to purge the antimatter reservoir on my mark." The Retribution groaned as it accelerated, hurtling towards the Singularity's maw. Warning klaxons blared, the ship's systems straining against forces they were never meant to endure. "Now!" Zara shouted. A blinding flash erupted as the antimatter stream tore through subspace. Yoshida's hands danced across the controls, guiding the ship through the impossible rift that had opened before them. The view screen exploded with light as Rhaegar's Dreadnought opened fire. But it was too late. The Retribution plunged into the tier, reality itself seeming to twist and fragment around them. When Zara's vision cleared, she found herself staring at a realm beyond comprehension. Fractured planes of existence overlapped, quantum possibilities bleeding into one another. "Status report," she managed, her voice hoarse. Santos looked up from her console, her face pale. We've scattered our warp trail, Captain. It should act as a beacon for Commander Zolta." Zara nodded grimly. "And Rhaegar?" "No sign of him," Chen reported. "The quantum interference is—" "A temporary reprieve," Zara finished. She called up the sensor data, her heart sinking as she analyzed the telemetry from the jettisoned shuttles. "They're being drawn in," she murmured. "If Rhaegar breaches the core—" The implications hung heavy in the air. Space-time itself would unravel, reality collapsing like a house of cards. Zara's mind raced through possibilities, each more desperate than the last. The Singularity Core, their own doomsday device, pulsed with deadly potential, but using it risked fracturing subspace beyond repair. "The deflector dish," she said suddenly. "If we can project an inverse Casimir field—" "The calculations required would be astronomical," Yoshida interjected. "We'd need—" A signal chirped, cutting through the despair. Zolta's voice, faint but unmistakable, filled the bridge. "We heard your plan, Captain," he said, his words distorted by quantum fluctuations. "The Keltsor priests, they believe they can help." Hope, fragile but undeniable, blossomed in Zara's chest. "How?" "A synchronous state," Zolta explained. "Their unified consciousness, it might provide the insights we need." Zara's tactical display flared to life, a new contact materializing. Rhaegar had found them. "All batteries, target that ship's mass," she ordered, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. "Okafor, coordinate the fire. We need to use its gravity to amplify our matter-antimatter pulse." As the Retribution's weapons lashed out, Zara felt the ship shudder beneath her feet. They were pushing the reactor beyond its limits, antimatter containment teetering on the edge of catastrophic failure. "Yoshida," she called out, "are you receiving the calculations?" The science officer nodded, his fingers blurring across his console. It's incredible, Captain. I've never seen anything like it." On the display, Rhaegar's Dreadnought loomed ever closer, its weapons primed to deliver the killing blow. But in that moment, Zara felt a strange calm settle over her. Whatever happened next, she knew they had given everything they had. "All hands," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the ship. "Prepare for—" "All hands," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the ship. "Prepare for dimensional shift." The bridge crew braced themselves as reality seemed to warp around them. Yoshida's hands flew across his console, his eyes wide with wonder, as he internalized the quantum calculations flooding his mind. "Captain," he breathed, "I've never seen anything like this. The Keltsor priests, their unified consciousness is providing insights beyond our wildest imaginings." Zara nodded, her gaze fixed on the interface. "Channel it all into the deflector dish. Every subatomic vector must align perfectly." As Yoshida worked, the ship began to hum with an otherworldly resonance. The very fabric of space seemed to vibrate in harmony with the retribution systems. "Deflector dish aligned," Yoshida reported. "Inverse Casimir field projecting at maximum power." Zara took a deep breath, steadying herself for what came next. "Vent the antimatter reactor. Focus the beam on the singularity's event horizon." For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, with a blinding flash, matter and antimatter collided at the threshold of oblivion. The resulting explosion was unlike anything Zara had ever witnessed, a transcendent eruption of energy that defied comprehension. The singularity's core ruptured, exotic matter reaching a state of critical saturated inversion. For an eternal instant, Zara felt as if she could see the very curvature of existence laid bare before her eyes. And then, implosion. The bridge shook violently as subspace convulsed around them. Higher dimensions snapped taut, shattering from the sudden ingression. The singularity's energy funnel twisted inside out, catalyzing a dimensional reversion shockwave that threatened to tear the retribution apart. "Hull integrity failing," Chen shouted over the cacophony of alarms. "We're breaking up!" Zara gripped her chair, her fingers tightening. She could feel reality itself reconstituting around them. Warped space-time detritus peppering the universe like cosmic shrapnel. Through the chaos, a faint transmission crackled over the comm. It was Zolta, his voice strained but determined. "Captain, the Keltsor, we're undergoing some kind of dissolution." The signal cut out abruptly. Zara's heart raced as she realized the full scope of what was happening. The retribution shuddered again, more violently this time. "Matter-antimatter containment failing," Okafor yelled. "We're approaching absolute zero entropy." Zara watched in stunned silence as her crew began to fade from existence, their very beings unmade by the cosmic forces surging around them. She felt her own form wavering, teetering on the edge of dissolution. With a final cataclysmic tremor, the retribution collapsed into formless negentropy. Zara's world went dark. She drifted in a sea of nothingness, her consciousness barely holding together through sheer force of will. Gradually, she became aware of her surroundings, a dimensionless meta-reality where existence hung suspended in quantum indeterminacy. Here, in this brain world of infinite potential, Zara witnessed realities blooming and dying like transient thought patterns. She marveled at the raw beauty of it all, the pure mathematics of creation laid bare before her. But something was wrong. A discordant note cut through the omniversal harmonics, a psychic resonance that spoke of hatred and defiance. Regor. Somehow, despite the universal compression, he had resisted entropic finality. His dreadnought began to coalesce around his malformed psyche, forced into reincarnation through sheer malevolent willpower. Zara's consciousness crystallized, focusing her intent. She felt the immaculate physics of this place responding to her will, governing the entropic reconstitution of Rhaegar's ship. His desperate attacks frayed against her calculations as she reduced his very form to a paradox. In his final moments, Rhaegar's spite breached a threshold Zara hadn't known existed. An ageless voice resonated through the brain world, a cosmic abhorrent whose existence predated reality itself. As the void spawn turned its primordial hunger towards the Omniverse's fundamental vibrational plane, Zara knew she faced a choice that would reshape existence itself.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.